Yeah, I think actually this meeting, this discussion here is really showing the complexities of Working Group 3. Just the extraordinary level of complexities that have had to be dealt with, and I'm now going to add to those. So the figures that I'm going to show are from IPCC, but whenever I say anything like, you know, this means X or this means Y, this is me speaking, this is not the IPCC. And John and I have coordinated to a degree, so I'm not going to be talking about demand reduction or energy efficiency, although I think that as a policy is the most important thing that we should be doing at the moment. So that is the lovely Cornish campus of Exeter University, in case any of you are interested. The discussion of mitigation policies runs throughout the Working Group 3 report, but in particular, the policies are in the sector-specific chapters, so that, you know, in the buildings chapter, there are policies about buildings. And then there are more general chapters, one of which is on international cooperation, another on regional development and cooperation, national and subnational policies and institutions, which I was part of, and cross-cutting investment and finance issues. I strongly recommend you to read those chapters. There's lots of information in them, and I'm not going to turn this presentation into a list of policies. You know, one of the highlights figure is that there are now more countries that have climate policies than did in AR4. And this is showing on each of those panels, on one side it's 2007, on the other side it's 2012, and the yellow is no climate policies. So we are now in a world where we do have a substantial increase in climate policies, which is a good thing. And there are all sorts of landscape agreements on climate change. This is from Chapter 13, and this is just showing that there's international agreements. Those agreements can span into the regions, they can span into the subnational. There is also, you know, a great deal of interesting smaller scale initiatives going on outside of governments that are to do with businesses or communities or other kind of networks. But overall, even with all this kind of thing in place, the overall level of mitigation is inadequate at the moment for stopping this rise in greenhouse gas emissions, which Otmar showed. And I have quite a kind of a clear story that I'm going to tell here, and one of which is that there are a lot of policies that do work, and there are a lot of examples around of policies that do work. And this is a rather sort of similar list to the one that Otmar showed, but you know, there's an increasing focus on policies that are designed to integrate multiple objectives and increase co-benefits, by which I mean a policy is put in place that has an objective that both meets development goals, say, and also greenhouse gas reduction goals, or energy security goals, and also reduction policy goals, whatever. There are economy-wide policies. You know, we have carbon taxes in certain places which, along with technology policies, decouples emissions from GDP. Increasingly, when we did a survey of policies, it's clear that there are more sector-specific policies that are used than economy-wide ones, and that's really because of the ease of getting those put in place. There are regulatory approaches, and then there is this very distinct role for technology and innovation policy alongside climate mitigation policies. So technology and innovation alongside getting a carbon price. And this is actually Otmar's work, whereby you have a technology push, say, for R&D, and then you have demand pull, a support mechanism, and then together you get a virtuous cycle. So there are an awful lot of examples of policies that do work. However, policies have to take account of other factors if they are to be successful. to be successfully implemented. One thing is that we know that delayed mitigation significantly increases the challenge to reach the low concentration target. So that means we really have to get going now. There is an enormous amount of inertia in the system. And so successful policies require what has been deemed an enabling environment, but you can call it other things really. No policy mechanism exists in a vacuum. For a policy mechanism to work, it has to fit in with the environment that it is established in. If it doesn't fit in, and if that environment around it isn't made to complement it, then that policy either won't work or won't be as successful as it otherwise would have been. And infrastructure development, spatial planning, and other long-lived products can lock societies into pathways which are difficult to change. So, you can have policies which in some senses are good, but if they don't have the sort of surrounding enabling environment, then they can lock us into, for a very long time, something we don't want. On the other hand, if an infrastructure development project is put in place as part of early action, then that can facilitate mitigation. And then finally, regions with the greatest potential and flexibility to leapfrog to low carbon trajectories are the poorer regions, and but where there are fewer lock-in effects, but they also have the lowest financial, technological and human capacities, and that therefore has to be recognised in order to help that leapfrogging occur. Right, so I am now going into what policies actually sort of do. So this is the point about this is if you put in place a successful policy which substantially reduces emissions, you are going to have major impacts. And we don't necessarily know what they are, but the point is that we as countries have to expect this and we have to be ready for this. So this is just taken from the SPM, and this is essentially showing that the required amount of energy demand is the top set, and the required amount of low carbon sources is the bottom set, and it's for 2030 and it's for 2050 in order that we get to this 2 degrees. So, for example, in transport, we're sort of talking about a 25% reduction in demand by 2030, and we've got, about a 10% increase in the use of low carbon energy in that. And then that would rise for 2050 to about 40% from low carbon energy sources on the supply side, but the demand would have come down 45%. And this is for these other end use sectors, which is transport, buildings, and industry. And my point is that in order to have that amount of demand reduction that we are going to need to have if we are to get to this 2 degree temperature change, it's going to have major technological implications, it's going to have major institutional implications, it's going to have major business and social implications. And we need to understand that's going to happen, because we know that policies only work if they have an enabling environment around them. Then we have to make sure that that enabling environment of the correct institutions, of the appropriate sort of business models, of managing social expectations and concerns, all have to be thought about. You can't just put in place these policies and not do the other stuff around it. And Otmar also showed this slide, which is just sort of slightly a more deeper point about that, is that we are going to have very large changes in investment patterns in order to make this happen. And that is going to have distributional impacts. So if we increase, have an increase in spending on energy efficiency, which is the panel nearest me by this amount, and then the next one in from me is the reduction in fossil fuels, that is going to really affect those people who are working in those industries, for example. So good and bad effects, but it has major distributional effects. And given the inertia in the system, we need to, countries need to be aware of that, and they need to make sure that they understand what is going to happen and that they are prepared to hold firm in the face of what will be the fossil fuel industry or whatever fighting against making that happen. So policies, in conclusion, policies, it's hard enough, you know, as we know, thinking about these policies, but policies have to be set into a wider context. So in conclusion, there are now more climate policies in place than there were for AR4. This is good. However, greenhouse gases are still rising and the rate is getting faster, and in that sense, there's insufficient policy stringency. There is a lot of evidence about successful policies for emission reduction, and there is a lot of examples of new actors and new ways of doing things which reduce emissions. But achieving these substantial emission reductions requires change and will have distributional, you know, technological, whatever, impacts. And therefore, the role of government is multifaceted. You know, it is about signing up to international agreements. It is about putting in place the enabling environment for these climate change policies. But also, it is about helping to break the inertia in the system. It is about managing change and distribution impacts, both positive and negative, on business and society. And it is about enabling inclusion so these new things can happen, and innovation. So thanks very much.